Go.
Go. Good to see you, Jeff. How are you?
Top of the morning to you, sir. And I guess the bottom of the afternoon.
Yeah. So we're into the afternoon over here in Sweden now.
Yep.
Okay, we are at chapter 6 of this fantastic book. We're going to get into some Christianity's actually going to start to make an appearance, but before we get there, it's like we've got to talk about the Egyptians, Osiris, the myth there, that type of thing. But I thought I would actually lead in with one of the thoughts that's been like quite present in my mind over the last couple of weeks since our last video, or it might have been the video before that, when we had a deeper dive into Plato and the Phaedo, and you and I were discussing beforehand, so like how we can have different interpretations of Plato. And I think one thing that a lot of people, especially a materialist, let's put it like that, a materialist mind, it's like must find it like really difficult to even begin to reconcile is when Plato's talking, he's arguing for the immortality of the soul. And to just treat it as an idea to be played with, and it's like it's in this Darwinian competition of ideas against ideas without any trying to test for the truthfulness of it, which is, I think, part of what Plato is actually trying to achieve in Phaedo there. And one of the things that sets people with a more spiritual bent apart from the materialists, metamodernists probably as well, is this actual ability to play with the idea that perhaps actually Plato was describing a truth. Not just it's just an idea, but he's actually saying something about you and I and every other human being. There is something immortal about us. Now, materialists has to reject that. Well, that's fine. You do that, guys. But if you begin to assess the truth value of that and don't reject it offhand and begin to play with the idea, and then somewhere along the line you might actually see there are actually stronger reasons for not rejecting that idea out of hand. And then further down the line you go, okay, yep, that's actually probably quite likely, but I don't have any direct experience of it. But here's all of these different people, particularly in our case, some people like Steiner, saying you don't have to just believe. You can train yourself. You can start the initiation process. Steiner isn't unique in this, but he's particularly clear. But it is actually, you are walking down a path where at the end of this path, you actually realize your own immortal nature. And this I think links us directly to where Steiner picks up this chapter 6, because I've chosen a couple of texts which will allow us to connect that thought with the Osiris myth. So what I thought we could do is start by, if you'd like to read the first text there, Jeff, and then I can thinking, and then we can enter into our normal conversation mode.
I'd be happy to. First, I wanted to say about what you were just talking about, because it was super rich, I thought, what you were bringing, and I've been thinking about something similar, but from my angle, which is having to do with the soul and self and the evolution of those realities out of the spiritual world into the physical, say. And and thinking about the way in which our evolutionary narrative or story in the Western world is bass backwards, essentially, right? And we have this golden opportunity, these amazingly sincerely sacred-minded people in the Greeks, starting with Pherecydes and Pythagoras and Heraclitus and the continuity of their influence right into Plato and Aristotle, and through them into like Plotinus, for example, right, and Philo, whatever his name is, and right into Aquinas and Steiner, and there's a stream that's available, not too countercultural, that is evidence, I would say, of the way in which the Greeks were doing, let's say, a psychology out of the spiritual perspective, which is the only way to do psychology in my mind. You can do it out of a material perspective, which would suggest that we're just outcasts, or you can get lost in the mire of self-absorbed soul trying to observe soul. It's like, the fox watching the hen house kind of thing. But we have this great and golden opportunity to see what they were actually on about, not from our point of view and how we can utilize them pragmatically for the day, but actually what they were touching upon that is as you were saying, evident and available to us through our epistemological processes. And Steiner describes that in relationship to this book, that it's a book written with the idea that you don't have to tear out the scientific methodology when it comes to coming to terms with these things. It's just that you can't start presumptively.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that before I read.
The postulates or the axioms that you're working from become critical to what type of truths you're going to arrive at, or what type of insights.
And deeply important as relates to who we are in the Vervaekian sense of the agent and arena, right? It's if you're presuming that there's the directionality is the Western narrative of directionality, you land in a different place as relates to what your actual agency is in your relationship with history and embryogenesis, for that matter, as we're learning in interdisciplinary astronomy. So a good table setting, I think, these two points of view coming into this.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. That's good.
All right, there it comes. The Osiris N has been purified in the pool which is south of the field of Hotep and north of the field of locusts, where the gods of verdure purify themselves at the 4th hour of the night and the 8th hour of the day with the image of the heart of the gods, passing from night to day. Thus, within the eternal cosmic order, the eternal in man is itself addressed as an Osiris. After the name Osiris comes the deceased person's own name, and the one who is uniting with the eternal cosmic order also calls himself Osiris. I am the Osiris N, growing under the blossoms of the fig tree, is the name of Osiris N. Thus, man becomes an Osiris. Being Osiris is only a perfect stage in human development. It seems obvious that even the Osiris, who is a judge within the eternal cosmic order, is nothing more than a perfect man. Between being human and being divine, there is a difference in degree and number. The mystic view of the mystery of number underlies this. Osiris, as a cosmic being, is one, yet he exists, nevertheless, undivided in each human soul.
Okay, why have I chosen this text? I want to the point that I was talking about with Plato. There's like working from the assumption that this is true, that all of us hidden deep below the surface is something of an immortal nature. If we take that as true and fundamentally true for all human beings, then we're going to find evidence of it. It's like throughout various cultures. And here we've got like it's like a perfect example of, in pre-Christian times, these people who are being initiated or working through this process. And this process, when we start talking about Christ and Buddha a little bit later, will become like really rich again. This idea that if we're going to wake up to our own immortal nature, then all of these initiation schools, they lead a pupil or the neophyte through a process towards an awakening of this inner ability. And that's what's being described in this myth here. I'm not in the myth, but in this particular text, it talks about Osiris N. Osiris, the name of the person that's being initiated. What are the various experiences that this soul, the inner life of a person, will inevitably go through as it gradually wakes up to its own eternal nature, its own immortal, unbegotten immortal nature. So with that in mind, let's just refresh the story of so like some of the main parts of the story of Osiris. So Osiris is the creator of Egypt, the creator of like the known civilized world, together with his wife Isis, and he has a brother, a little bit like was it Jacob has his brother Esau, and this brother is Seth or Typhoon, and Steiner talks about him as like being this Aramanical, it's like impulse already evident there in the story. But we're supposed to like experience how we are. It's like Osiris N. So we were this divine being, and together with Isis, we lived in harmony with the world, but we were ignorant of ourselves. Seth comes along. He tricks us into a coffin, which is perfectly matched to our size. It's the exact size of our body, and he throws it into the Nile, and Isis actually finds her husband, finds Osiris. But for some reason, she doesn't pick him up immediately, and Seth finds out, and he chops up the body into somewhere between 14 and 42, depending on which version of the myth it is, pieces. And these are scattered all throughout Italy. What am I talking about? Italy. Egypt. Scattered all throughout Egypt. And then Isis has to return this divine being. She's puts him all together, but he can't return to the normal world of the living as we understand it. He then becomes the god of the dead, or the god of the realm beyond. It's like what we experience with our normal consciousness. But from that realm, he sends down like a shaft of light and impregnates impregnates Osiris. Impregnates Isis. Osiris impregnates Isis and then gives birth to Horus. So we've got this idea of something's coming from beyond, from the invisible realms, impregnating a soul, a body, and then out of that body it's a new divine being created. And this describes what the process of initiation is. It's a recognition that we come from the divine worlds. We've lost, for good reasons, which we won't go into here, but for good reasons, we've lost that direct awareness, that consciousness of that world. But we can we have a seed in us which needs to be, it's like fertilized, needs to be it's like awoken. It's like a cosmic shaft of light from Osiris that's like begins to start something growing in ourselves, so that we wake up to, it's like our own, it's like true divine, immortal, unbegotten natures. So the purpose, this story is not just a story, it's a from an initiate's perspective, I have to make that story so like real about me, so that I begin to ask myself those questions about, so like, how do I wake up? It's like this experience. How do I gradually like work through these different processes that are going on there? And this was like at the heart of Egyptian culture, this Egyptian civilization, this fundamental belief in the initiation schools that this is what you did to wake up to your divine nature. So I went on. It's like talking for quite a while there.
No,
What about yourself? What did
I
you?
think very helpful to tell the editorially tell the myth. So sort of in relationship to what I was saying before, I don't think they believed in their immortality. I think that the initiation rites were the experience of the immortality and what one would find there through the Egyptians, which is different than the Greeks, because the Greeks had their, the world of shades, and but they also had this wonderful picture of the personality, Pythagoras and Pherecydes particularly, that is reincarnating. Right? And that was a reality that was realized through the initiatory process. And it also speaks toward this evolutionary process that's occurring in consciousness, because now the Egyptians, in their part, heading toward this the moment of Christ, are dealing with death in a almost objective kind of way, through ritual, of course, still through the artistic and religious and the religio, but also through cogent expression of what human beings could experience, and the story one could tell for the people. So the people believed in order to navigate the world, and the initiates experienced, and so they were at the genesis of these stories, and they were then also at the genesis of their time, telling the story of humanity at that time. And that all points to the next moment that's going to occur. And we'll talk about that with how Buddha then is a representative of this transfiguration of the physical body as a potential, the physical body and the soul that's connected with the physical body, not the same exact soul that is connected with the spiritual body, which is the originating factor. But we have this moment where we can see it all at play before that Western moment that then occludes the soul and spirit as the originating factors, and just explains the spinning top that's left over as momentum, and calls that science, right? But we have this moment where the Osiris being the being that is the individuality in each person, each soul, as potential, expressed in such a beautiful and available way, and that the death ritual was a way to achieve that, to die, to go through a 3-day death, and various meanings or various methods, say, in different cultures, some through water, some through other asphyxiations of sorts, some through probably poisons, which also, are from the Western mind, are hallucinogens that produce these subjective experiences, that sort of thing.
want to pick up on something that you said that I think is important in this concept. In this context, and it's to do with the concept of reincarnation. You brought it in with the Greeks, and it's very interesting that when an Egyptian died, it's like they were brought to this scales, and Osiris is there, sort of like doing the weighing, and Thoth sort of like the scribe there, so like noting down the results, and it's like your heart is weighed against a feather, and if it comes down on the correct side, then off you go to be with Osiris. But you don't reincarnate, because it's like life in the beyond for the ancient Egyptians was like life on earth, but without the suffering. But interestingly, also, if you were found to be sort of like, if your heart was heavier than a feather, then you were fed to the dog Amit, and Amit meant sort of like the destruction, the annihilation of your being and consciousness. So the reason I'm picking this up is with the Egyptians, you've got something that is quite similar to the way that's Christians perceived what the afterlife is. It's it's one time. It's like you have one go at life, and if you're lucky, you get through and you'll go to heaven, and if you don't, then you're fed to Satan, or you're fed to Amit. And this raises this question, which Steiner talks about as well, which is the importance of reincarnation as a concept that has to become alive within humanity. This genuine recognition that this life has consequences. It's not just game over at the end of it, and it's like everything's rubbed out. And it's like, if you, depending on what you believed, you'll go to, I don't know, nirvana or heaven or hell, or wherever the different places are. There's a continuity there, which can be, depending on how you see it, can be haunting, or it can become a blessing, because it's the ultimate. It's the means by which true individual freedom actually becomes possible. It's somewhat Lutheran in that sense. You have to work for your own salvation. So I wanted to bring in that with reincarnation, because the Egyptians, they were quite different there. And then, as you correctly said, with the Greeks, people like Pythagoras, and his teacher Pherecydes, you've got this idea that no, there's something more permanent about us, and it's going to come back. And an important part of the equation.
Crucial, really. And Steiner's not mentioning it here. I mean,
No.
He's lectured very significantly and written about reincarnation and karma, and the importance of the importance in the evolution of humanity and our thrival, if not survival, that we reconnect with that psycho-spiritual scientific reality.
Yeah.
Right. And that it's plausible to it's important to see the plausibility of it in order to come closer to the nature of it, say. Yeah. And so this I think we'll get into this as the book progresses, because it is so crucial. And he refers in other places to the Christ as the Lord of Karma, which is a really interesting thing, because if you think about that event at that time, that's a fairly new historical moment, and things changed dramatically, or were changing dramatically, and so were addressed in that way. So this is a bit of a foreshadow without saying too much about it, but I believe we're going to end up here. in relationship to personalities and self, and the eternal versus the temporal, and the potential in the temporal to become eternal, if we have our directionality right, from an evolutionary standpoint.
We were talking earlier, weren't we, just before we came on air, about how did we ever end up on this path? It's like how did we fall off the materialist path and sort of like recognize its limits, which other people, which we talk about, don't seem to be able to. They're still like firmly rooted in this materialist paradigm. And we both shared like ideas, but I have talking about this now makes me remember also how the concept of reincarnation, when I first came across it and started reading the evidence for it, that was one of those that's really fundamentally changes your own self-perception of what you are as like at essence. So I think definitely it's like confronting the question of reincarnation in an honest way and looking at the arguments for and against can be a vital step for many people, and it's like recognizing that there's something beyond emergent behavior.
Excellently put. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Okay. My second text. Can you see it there?
All right. Yes, I'm ready to go. This clarifies what we are told about the incidents of initiation. The candidate is subjected to mysterious procedures by means of which his earthly nature was killed and his higher nature awakened. It is not necessary to study these procedures in detail if we understand their meaning. This meaning is contained in the confession possible to everyone who went through initiation. He could say, I envision the endless perspective at the end of which lies the perfection of the divine. I felt that power of this divine is within me. I buried what keeps down that power, that bower in me. I died to earthly things. I was dead. I had died as a lower man. I was in another world. I had intercourse with the dead and with those who have already become part of the eternal cosmic order. After my sojourn in the nether world, I arose from the dead. I overcame death, but now I have become a different being. I have nothing more to do with perishable nature. For me, this has become saturated with the Logos. I now belong to those who live eternally and who will sit at the right hand of Osiris. I myself shall be a true Osiris. Part of the eternal cosmic order and the judgment of life and death will be placed in my hands. The candidate for initiation had to submit to the experience which made such a confession possible for him. It was an experience of the highest kind that the neophyte passed through.
This is emphasizing for me again this process that anybody chooses to go down this path will inevitably go through. Some people will accelerate that path and it's join initiate schools, but there is this fundamental idea also there that humanity is beings in the evolution of humanity, there are forces, there are spiritual realities that are ensuring it's not just one or two. It's lucky guys and gals back in Egypt who had this direct experience of the divine, but that history will move this process along so that our own divine nature becomes a direct experience for more and more people. I think an interesting question in this, also in this context, is the importance of this tricky word, faith, because faith is one of these. It's an easily maligned word. Science is saying we don't need faith, we need facts, and they've got some good points with that. Absolutely, it's like knowledge has to be based in experience. There's no way around that. However, there's a lot of faith going on in science, in materialist science as well. One of the biggest articles of faith in science, in materialist science, is that everything is reducible back to it's like atoms bouncing in various directions and emergent behavior. So these are huge articles of faith. And if you talk about if you listen to interviews with interesting scientists where they're brought to this point where they recognize, we don't have an answer for that, but they believe in the process of science to be able to find an answer to that in the future. So what is the act of faith going on in a neophyte, in an initiate? It's an inner voice is alive in them, recognizing that these are serious ideas, and actually being scientific about the approach, and saying, I'm not just going to accept this on authority. I am going to go through a schooling so that it becomes a direct experience, so that the text that we just read can become the testimony of anybody that's been through the initiation experience. I was in the netherworld, Hercules. I talked with the dead, with those who have already become part of the eternal cosmic order. After my sojourn into the netherworld, I arose from the dead. I overcame death, but now I have become a different being. Imagine being able to say that from direct experience, because that's what these people are saying is, and we don't have to restrict ourselves to the Egyptians here. The prophets of Israel, ancient Israel, they were talking out of the same out of the same spirit of being initiated, the Mithraic mysteries. You've got so many different mystery centers that were alive in ancient times. The founding of Rome, it was the inspiration for the founding of Rome, according to the founding myth, is these guys. So they go down to the underworld to find out what it is that they're supposed to do. So these are, nowadays we have politicians and and different groups making policy about how society should go forward. They didn't have these type of things in ancient times. They had mystery schools, which were the sources of these societal impulses that were going to work throughout history. So they had a very real, strong impact on life back then. And this is an example of how they talked back then.
Well, they still talk that way, but they don't let us know about it. Right. So
Go and say what you mean.
The whole neoconservative movement, ushered in by Leo Strauss and his obscure language, that changed the nature of the political scene in the United States, from a left-right, genuine conservative, liberal dialectic, say, into a cynical, elitist professionalism that uses both to obscure the above the clouds libertarians who do go through initiation rituals at Yale and Harvard and
Mhm.
Oxford and wherever else they're the famous skull and crossbones, right?
Yeah.
That a solid C student like George Bush could be the president of the United States junior, right? So these secret brotherhoods exist. They know and take seriously the relationship with the dead in
Yeah.
order to
Okay, with you now.
manipulate, right? So this is
Yeah.
something probably also will come up after we delve into the Christ as Lord of Karma and of the way in which the symbolic nature of that act is also a real act that is no longer a mythology that can be told, because we don't have time to tell mythologies anymore to placate the people. The people are living through it now, and I would suggest that we are born into death as materialism is a symptom of the way in which evolution is hardening, and that we are standing on two sides of a threshold. We're standing in death and we're standing in life. And life is what we call death, and death is what we call life.
I've been looking. I talked about Italy earlier. Dante has been on my mind because I've been reading. There's a 4 books. There's supposed to be a series of 15 books called Convivio, written by Dante, and he in this one of the, he does several interesting things in this book. One I'll mention briefly, and the other one I'll go into in more detail. One, he talks about how philosophy was the love of his life after Beatrice died. But she was a real being, like we've talked about before. It's like in different things. But there, it's like it's on the page. This isn't some allegory. This isn't some it's like made up image. He is talking in this text about how this is a real being, and he felt her presence and benefited from her wisdom. So the for me, in the context of this conversation, one of the important things that he does is he talks about how to read texts. It's like hermeneutics, the interpretation of text. He talks about literal, allegorical, moral, and anagogical. Literal, everyone can know. There's a strong tendency to read a text like we've just read. We've had 2 quotes actually as just an allegory. And this is better than literal. Okay, if we can put it like that. It's like we can like entertain, we can like live in the narrative even though it doesn't seem to be real. But when he develops this idea of anagogical, what he's saying is that this text is actually reflecting spiritual facts. And this is so close to what Steiner is describing here in this text. Is we have gone beyond allegory. The spiritual world is real, and it can be indirectly described. So like maintaining the essential truths of processes that go on in the spiritual world. It's like within a story, so that I think this is probably where a lot of people understandably struggle with texts like this. It's like it's an idea, but that's all it is. And what Steiner and anthroposophists in general are saying, this is more than an idea. This is a imaginative picture of spiritual facts, and it's really important to emphasize this, that to move forward in this process, we have to, just like when we learn about physical facts in the world, and let's say we go on an electronics course, and then we use that knowledge, so like when we're building electronic circuits or whatever it is, or it's like we're building it's like an electric motor. So we use that knowledge, and then we use that so like creatively with imagery to create something new. But here we've got genuine we've got spiritual concepts which then can sort of be presented in lots of different ways while still being true to the essence of the spiritual facts that are being woven into the story.
And as spiritual beings, we're participating in that process, right? And it's transparent to us, increasingly transparent to us, availably increasingly transparent, potentially increasingly transparent. And I would suggest maybe what we're seeing in our culture is something like the initiates that the neophyte initiates that were described by Steiner early in this book, when he's talking about how terrifying it is to stand at that threshold, and we're all standing at that threshold. So we're all running around with our with our clothes on fire, with our identities on fire. And right, so it's important to inhabit that identity, because that identity is going to be the personality that you carry through the other side, so that when you get there, and we are on both sides, as I've suggested, that you have an ability to navigate in that world that is at first just imaginal, but that's just the gateway. The imaginal is the beauty and the terrifying nature also of it. The two sides of that reality are that it's both terrifying, repulsive, and alluring and beautiful, and without the self that mediating between the two, you're lost in one direction or you're lost in the other, and seeking security at all costs, or possession of some solid ground narrative that is not applicable to the initiatory process that we're all going through.
You're torn apart. This idea of being torn apart is also something that comes up multiple times in these ancient myths. It's like in Osiris we've got it, but also it's deeply connected with Dionysus, also the son of a god born of a mortal mother. So there is, again, also with Dionysus we see some of the essential characteristics, what we would call spiritual truths, being described in the Osiris myth, being dressed up by the Greeks in a different myth that are still communicating essential truths, but they'll focus on some aspects rather than the other. Because like with the Dionysus myth, it's interesting. Dionysus is the god that tears everything up. It's the Ahrimanic principle. It's the intellect that's cuts up the world and leaves us in this dead atomic world. But there is actually it's generally less well known, but actually also Dionysus then ends up having to go to the netherworld to rescue his mother Semele. So he also has a mission, which is to unite his being with the physical being, so to bring her back to life.
Wisdom, the resurrection of wisdom, or with that which is entombed in matter, that has forecasted out of the past, so to speak, and that we've accelerated that ash that we've thrown forward and call it reality, and now we have to vivify it. Right, that's our work.
And wisdom, that's another name for Isis, basically. So one way of describing it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's move on to your first text. This is a wonderful piece. Steiner really does something fantastic here. Anyway, I shall read it. The life of Jesus, however, contains more than the life of Buddha. Buddha's life ends with the transfiguration. The most significant part of the life of Jesus begins after the transfiguration. In the language of the initiates, Buddha reaches the point where divine light begins to shine in man. He stands before the death of the physical. He becomes the cosmic light. Jesus further. He does not die physically at the moment the cosmic light transfigures him. At that moment, he is a Buddha. But at the same moment, he enters upon a stage which finds expression in a higher degree of initiation. He suffers and dies. The physical part of him disappears, but the spiritual, the cosmic light does not vanish. His resurrection follows. He reveals himself to his community as Christ. At the moment of his transfiguration, Buddha dissolves into the hallowed life of the universal spirit. Christ Jesus awakens this universal spirit once more to present existence in a human form. Such an event had formerly taken place in a pictorial sense at the higher stages of initiation. Those initiated according to the Osiris myth attained to such a resurrection in their consciousness as a pictorial experience. In the life of Jesus, this great initiation was added to the Buddha initiation, not as a pictorial experience, but as reality. Buddha demonstrated by his life that man is the Logos and that he returns to this Logos, to the light, when his physical part dies. In Jesus, the Logos itself became a person. In him, the Word became flesh.
If I had to prepare a statement beforehand, I would never say what I'm about to say.
Okay, go for it.
The resurrection is a scientific fact. It's just that the science is not a truncated material science that depends on studying the after effects of momentum, say, or something like that, or as we put elsewhere, chemical outgassing and that sort of thing. What the Greeks allow us to do, what the mythologies that we've been looking at allow us to do, is to walk through this experience out of a mythological world into a post-mythological world. So the Buddha is extraordinarily important as a step in this direction, because there's the transfiguration that occurs, that enlightenment in its ultimate form can occur. Then what? What's the next step?
Yeah.
And so, this is what I've argued is not the right word. This is what I feel like I'm discovering myself personally, that this, when we were looking at Mary Magdalene's the Gospel of Mary, and the crucifixion and mostly the resurrection is what we're that deals with, and it deals with the process of resurrection. It's and the traverse back into life, say, and as a person, as a self that has lived as a self, carrying the self back into the life processes. And I'm part of my theory, and it's a theory, is that the 7 life processes are where the Christ resides in the etheric world, and that those are twisted in humanity, and that resurrection process is the next step. There's still next steps. It didn't end at that moment, and it's ontogenetic. It's ongoingly genetic. The genesis is constant, and we are at the point of accessing this beyond the mythical. So this isn't a mythical story anymore. This is reality. This is the way in which reality has been pointing for all of cosmic existence, say, and it's coming to fruition in the physical processes, say. Matter is still inert, right? But deeper and deeper is the vessel through which we are, through which the spirit is incarnating, and human beings are on a continuum with beings who are participating in this reciprocitously, if I can coin a word, right? Not merely recursively, like a mechanical process that is going along by some abstract notion of natural selection with no agency, but by a mediated self that now is a resurrected self that has created a vessel for you and I. And the Buddha is extraordinarily important in this because of the compassion body that the Buddha prepared for all of humanity, and is working, according to Steiner. This is a little bit fantastic for what we're talking about, but in the sphere of Mars, right? The transformation of the lower nature, Typhoon, into a non-embattled one, into a passion that has reached compassion, as opposed to the torn apart warring self. But we're still here, and we're warring with ourselves.
No. This is one of the reasons I do love reading Steiner, when something deeply significant like this. One of the things before what we've read, one of the things that he discusses is in the life of great initiates, there are certain like way markers, so like all the way down the path, that it's a little bit like, it's like a seed has to like first like send some roots down before it can start sending it up, and then once it's got like a stalk, which is like with 2 leaves, those like die away very quickly, and then it actually starts growing its own leaves. And at some point, it's like it takes the next leap, and it's like it starts creating, it's like the petals for the flower. And then the next phase is it's got its flower and it's got its stem in the middle, and then they're pollinated, and then they become seeds, and you've got the whole process. This idea that there are definite stages in the spiritual development of a human being. So what we talked about with like the initiate, it's like has to go through these different definite stages which are recognizable. This is why it's like in the past gurus were so important, because they were capable of recognizing when it's like a neophyte had achieved a certain stage of soul development, so that they could then be given like the next exercises to move them forward. What Steiner's describing here is, yeah, those phases that we have to go through in our own development. Buddha and Christ also, and it is useful, it is instructive to see them through that lens, to understand how Christ and Buddha, it's like when we're talking about the transfiguration, were at the same evolutionary stage. This could be one way of describing what he's saying. That this achievement of nirvana is insight into the spiritual world, is something that all initiates, so the higher level initiates, will actually achieve. But importantly here, what he's saying is that then Christ goes beyond this, and actually, so rather than just like leaving the body and having no need to return to earth, because you no longer have any karma, which is quite common in Buddhist traditions. There's this idea that no, I can come back to earth. It's like it's possible to develop such spiritual strength that a reincarnation, like a resurrection of the body, is possible.
Not only that, but it's your duty. Like it is your responsibility to develop as much of that self that goes through a portal and comes back, because now that that clearing of karma has to happen for all of humanity, not just one person reaching some stage of transfiguration.
Yeah.
Right. So now it is all that we're not all. If we don't all get out of this, then none of us will. Right. And so that meaning the cycle of karma, the cycle of
yeah. Yeah, because it's that the let's call what the early adopters. Let's call them early adopters, but the ones that do achieve it earlier than the rest. That blessing that they've had in their own life, they will also want other people to benefit from it. It's inevitable that you're going to want to. It's like return to those that you loved, to help them find a way out of whatever situation it is, that whichever paradigm it is that they are trapped in.
Yeah. So there, in this book, there's no turning back right now. Right. So it's really interesting to see where we'll go from here. And his that's emblematic of history. There's just no turning back. We're not going to be able to. We don't create myths. First of all, like there's nobody out there. This is the thing that I loved about Joseph Campbell, and I have problems with Joseph Campbell. This relates to. He was a great celebrator of myths and the way in which he could pull out the meanings of myths in order to help one's psychological state or to orient oneself in a developmental way, that sort of thing, which is important. And it's important to see myth within the context of the way in which it was created. And who's creating myth now? Nobody. There's no. Myth is a sort of. There are mythopoetic artists. There are art itself. You could say is telling a myth that we can recover in ages and ages and ages from now if we looked at all of it in a complex, patterned manner and said, here's what was being said from the higher consciousness of humanity who remain unconscious of their higher consciousness, right? Yeah. And then there's like, in a certain sense, you could say that the minor initiates who are running the world right now, as I was referring to earlier, are tapping into the ethos in order to manipulate it, something like that. And then that goes into a whole conversation about specters and people who are still attached to the earth. And I don't think we need to go there right now, but this really
just to pick up an important point there, just to spell it out. Of course, initiation can also mean like moral corruption if it's not done in a correct sense. This is part of the problem. It's like once you start interacting with the spiritual world, if you don't do it consciously, then what spirits are you actually letting in? What are those impulses that are out there? They're waiting to find a human host. But
this is why epistemology is so important in this day and age. Like sounds like nerdy philosophical talk when I'm saying this in my own head, but with high schoolers, I believe that epistemology should be the entryway into high school, into the four higher grades. Say in the States, that's 9th through 12th grade, and then one graduates, so to speak. The whole notion of graduation and succession would mean something different if people could tap into that which is essentially spiritual in them, and work with that in order to see all of the other subjects, other disciplines, and understand what's common to them all. And it's so important that this becomes scientifically approachable, because we're not going to accept it any other way. It's not going to be accepted, and neither should it be accepted, that there is a spiritual world, and the spiritual world is engaging in a creative act constantly, and that we are participants in that process, and the initiation is life itself, and with things we can do to accelerate it, like spiritual practices and such.
And just carrying on with what you're saying there, and this is obviously one of those aspects that Joseph Campbell failed in quite a significant way, and from my perspective, because like you're saying, it's life enhancing to bring those myths to life within you. But if the inner cleansing, if the purification is not there on this journey, then we're missing out on a huge aspect of what is true for all ancient myths. It's like this aspect of a cleansing of the astral body, so that your own astral body doesn't become a polluter of the impulses that you receive. And obviously I wouldn't expect somebody like Campbell to use the word astral body, but not for we're going back to like a decade or two since I last touched on him, but I have no recollection of him ever talking about like the development of a morality as an essential part of this myth, of the journey, of the hero's journey, is what he calls it, isn't it? But I stand to be corrected there if I've said something wrong. But it's certainly something certainly not something that sticks in my mind from having read him. I don't know. I know you've looked at him. Does that ring true, what I'm saying, or do you? Yeah. Okay. Shall we move forward to the last slide? Yeah. Okay. Let's just look at this one. So, final slide. Faith in one, the primordial initiator, was to be added to faith in the mystical forces which light up in man's inner being during initiation. The mystics sought apotheosis. They wished to experience it. Jesus was made divine. We must cling to him. Then we are participants in this apotheosis within the community established by him. This became Christian conviction. What was made divine in Jesus is made divine for his whole community. Lo, I am with you always, even until the end of the world. Matthew 28:20. The one born in Bethlehem has an eternal character. Thus, the Christmas antiphon is able to speak of the birth of Jesus as if it took place every Christmas. Today, Christ is born. Today, the Savior has come into the world. Today, the angels are singing on earth.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there, and it's in a way it's an introduction to the rest of the book. But the idea that the Christogenesis is constant, that there are many births too of it. There's the birth of Jesus that he compares in relationship to the birth of another prepared one, say, karmically prepared one, in Buddha. Then there's the birth at the baptism, the water ritual, right? And then there's the birth at the resurrection. There's the birth back into life out of death, and that I liked what you were saying earlier because of the way in which initiates are way ahead of their time, right? And of course, Christ is then exceeds initiation and is the initiatory path as the fully humanized spiritual reality, which includes all of the gestalt, so not just physiology, although it includes physiology remarkably. And that's how you can get to this, I would say, scientifically, is that it's that reality comes into being from the spiritual world. It doesn't come into being from the physical world. And we are participants in that, and Christ is the way forward. And that introduces us to a proper orientation to Christianity. I'm so glad he did this with the mythologies and remained conservative in his language and not as exploratory in the spiritual worlds with the language that one must develop in order to orient oneself there.
Yeah. I was listening to some people talking about an aspect of Christianity. I can't remember the details now, but one of the things that I found interesting was the absolute importance of like the historical Jesus. And I'm not saying it's unimportant, but it's of minor importance. It's like when we're having these type of conversations, because it's more the mystical attitude that becomes relevant for the initiate. There's this spiritual Christ force which will allow me to wake up to my own divine nature. It's like God lives in me and I live in God. I think is it chapter 16 or 17 of John. He repeated like 4 times, like in that particular chapter. And it's an impulse that we need to awaken within us, and continually talking about the historicity, that's like the factual accuracy of the Gospels, is unessential in that process. It's the mystical attitude of, if is it Silesius who says, if Christ doesn't die in you, then he died in vain. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's this idea that if it doesn't live in you, then it isn't, that then it has, it's like just a mere belief it is completely trivial, in the sense that we have to bring this impulse into our lives and into our communities, because of the life that it reintroduces into those communities to counteract the deadly forces which other spiritual impulses are dead set on destroying humanity with.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm brought back to the community is humanity, right?
Yeah.
And as long as there's humanity in humanity, you know what I mean? That we haven't transgressed the soul into a transhumanism that is being called for, because of all of the reasons we've said and many more. That community or that communion is the human community, and that consciousness is available at first through an individuation, because that's the direction that evolution has gone in, a complex world, not a complexifying world, that is individuating, right? And the Christ being in flesh is the example of the singularity as multiplicity becoming unified in the integrity of an individual, that then opens up in the field of life that is not local to individual souls, the Christ community, if you will. And that is a scientific fact.
Community.
Community. They won't be able to open.
Yeah. Okay. Lovely talking to you, Jeff.
You too.
I know you need to. I know you need to rush, so we'll leave it there. Okay.
Bit of an emergency, so thank you.
Yeah.
I loved our time together again. Thank you.
Cheers, Jeff. Okay. Bye.